You're listening to the Baumbastic Podcast with Andrew Ellis on Inside Arkansas.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Baumbastic Podcast, presented by Inside Arkansas and hosted by Andrew Ellis. Hope y'all enjoyed the nice, cool little intro we got. Just a little bit of a shakeup, nothing crazy. Still the same premise. Still got the Charlie Welch home run there in the background. But you know, year two, we're launching into another step, another evolution of the Baumbastic Podcast. So we wanted to switch it up a little bit. Hope y'all enjoyed that. And thank you for being here today. It is a beautiful January 20th. And when I say beautiful, I really mean freezing cold. Like I have not stepped foot outside my house today. January 20th, we are counting down the days to baseball season. We are still very excited. And for those of you that have been watching Arkansas basketball, I'm sure you really can't wait for Arkansas baseball season to come around. And of course, we will have the team's first official practice and open scrimmage for everyone on Friday. So be sure to come out to Baum-Walker Stadium if you can make it. If not, or even if you do, be sure to tap in with us because we are going to be doing a live stream breakdown, recap, review of that first scrimmage. Hopefully that ends up being around 5:30-ish is when I would say the ETA is, but I'll continue to keep you guys updated on that front. Really cannot wait to get back out to Baum-Walker Stadium, have some definitive things to talk about with you guys. And again, really just can't wait for baseball season altogether. But as far as today's topic goes, I wanted to touch on a question that a few people have been asking about for a little bit, about defense mostly. So shout out to Ray Brazel. I hope I'm saying this right. Brazel, maybe Brazil, maybe Brazil. I don't know. So I hope I said it right. Ray Brazel. But Ray is one of the all-time great Baumbastic Podcast listeners. He's been very supportive. Really appreciate him. He loves baseball, loves the Hogs, and we appreciate his support as well. So he tweeted at me the other day and said, outside of turning double plays, fielding probably takes a dive. But this season, he gets the vibe that DVH is not worried about the defense. He would rather take the doubles off the wall because Arkansas's got a lot of hitters. And he also notes that in the last 7 years, Arkansas's worst fielding percentages have been pretty good seasons. So, of course, there's not a direct correlation to fielding percentage and success. And shout out to Aaron Emerson as well, who's been asking for a while, a month ago, who will be the best defender on the team? And then 2 weeks, have you talked about who will be Arkansas's best defender? I was actually kind of saving this subject, or specifically Aaron's question, for closer to the season, because let's just be honest, it's not a like we do a lot of topics here on the show. This one is a little bit of a tougher one to dive because a lot of it is kind of subjective and there's less to really evaluate. Obviously, fielding percentage is kind of what we all go off of, errors and fielding percentage. And for a team, I feel like that's very valuable. And we'll touch on that when we look at some numbers here in a second. But really, fielding percentage doesn't tell the full story specifically for an individual. I mean, a catcher's fielding percentage is going to be night and day different than a third baseman's fielding percentage. And it's just kind of all different. Same for outfield and all those things. And so it's kind of tough to really have a definitive, this guy did X, so that means he ranks here. And again, fielding percentage doesn't really tell the full story. I mean, if you don't get to a baseball, if they hit a ball up the middle and you can't quite get to it and it gets on through for a base hit, that doesn't knock your fielding percentage, but perhaps a better athlete, a better overall fielder who has better instincts would have gotten to that ball. And a lot of times what you see is like Casey Martin, who I'm going to reference in a little bit. Casey Martin was the king of covering ground. He had as much range as literally anybody, but a lot of times he would get to a ball that most people wouldn't get to and then make an error on it, whether it was a throwing error or just coughing up the ball a little bit. So like there's a lot that you can really dive into, and a lot of it really is just eye test and kind of gut feel. And that's another part of this is you kind of trust the development and the instincts of the coaches who are putting these guys in these positions, but are also developing them throughout the year and kind of know what these guys are capable of. And if there's one thing you can really trust this Arkansas coaching staff with, it's defense. I mean, they've been elite nationally when it comes to defense. They've been elite at developing prospects, developing guys who we maybe didn't think were super great defenders. Hell, this time last year, Vahiva Aloy's defense was a very real question mark. He had some rough numbers defensively as a freshman at Sacramento State. Most of those apparently were throwing errors, and so they cleaned that up, and he was one of the more consistent defenders in the SEC this past year. And so Arkansas's coaching staff has a nice track record, specifically with catchers as well. I want to give Bobby Wernes, who was a great Razorback defender at third base in his own right. Bobby Wernis, who is, I believe, primarily like works with the catchers defensively, he's done a really good job. I mean, since he's been on the staff, you've seen every single catcher Arkansas has brought in has gotten substantially better. I mean, obviously, Casey Opitz was one of the best catchers in the country in 2021, defensively specifically. Michael Turner was a guy that came into Arkansas, hadn't played a ton at catcher, wasn't a full-time for sure, no doubt about it, catcher. He turns into one of the more consistent defenders on the team, one of the best defensive catchers in the SEC. Parker Rowland was another guy. Junior college level, his defense was very much a question mark. He comes to Arkansas, and he was extremely solid defensively, not necessarily with the bat. And then even Hudson White was a guy who, you looked at the numbers, really struggled at Texas Tech defensively. He cleaned that up in a big way this past season at Arkansas. And so there's a little bit of benefit of the doubt that is going to be given to this coaching staff. And of course, Dave Van Horn himself also played second base at Arkansas. And we've seen a lot of guys really transform into high-level defenders during their time at Arkansas. And so we'll see if they're able to kind of continue that trend. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go position by position and break down each spot and kind of how we feel about it, you know, who the candidate is there and whether or not they're going to kind of be good, average, better than last year, what. We will do that. But first, I want to look at some team numbers from the last few years here. So as you can see, the last 4 years, there's really not been anybody in the country as consistently solid as Arkansas, second in the SEC the last 3 years, first in the SEC in 2021. I would also point out that it was a different team all 3 years that ranked above Arkansas. I believe it was Florida 1 year, Mississippi State the other. I cannot remember for the life of me that other third one. But my point is that, like, consistently Arkansas has been pretty elite when it comes to just team fielding percentage overall. I believe that 2022 season is the school record. So basically, you're looking at the 4 best defenses of all time in program history have been here in the last 4 years. Arkansas's offense has, of course, declined during that time period. But this is a big reason why Arkansas has been able to kind of remain on top and win a ton of games in the regular season. Their defense and their ability to limit mistakes has been a huge driving force in their success. And of course, the pitching staff certainly doesn't hurt. And then you see these numbers in 2018, 2019. I had kind of forgotten how, I guess bad is a stretch, but how just middling Arkansas's defensive numbers were back in the day. And I was looking at, you know, just some individual numbers that added to that. In 2019, of course, Arkansas had Casey Martin at shortstop, who made a crisp 25 errors that year. Anytime you have a guy you commit 25 errors, you are going to be in the bottom 5 of your conference in terms of team fielding percentage. And the year before, in 2018, Casey Martin was playing third base, and I believe he made 15 errors. So, you know, not nearly as bad, but still 15 errors is substantial. I mean, that's like almost twice as much as Arkansas's had in these last 4 years. I mean, Vahiva Aloy made 7 errors yet last year, and he played shortstop every day. Caden Wallace, I believe in 2022, where they set the overall percentage record, I believe Caden Wallace made 11 errors at third base that year, but he also fielded an insane amount. Like, his percentage really wasn't that bad, but he just, for whatever reason, third base was a magnet. And so his 11 errors was kind of like the closest thing you could see to that Casey Martin number, who committed like literally 45 errors or 40 errors in 2 seasons. Yeah, Arkansas really just hasn't had a guy like that who just makes mistakes on a pretty routine basis. And by the way, that 2018 season as well, Heston Kjerstad made 7 errors in left field. 7 errors in left field. That is like, it's funny. It's actually hilarious looking back on it, especially because Heston actually wound up becoming a pretty good defender by the time he left Arkansas. And I mean, now he's playing in the big leagues. He's played some right field, played some left field, even played some first base. And so, like, Heston really figured it out. But and I knew he struggled defensively as a freshman. 7 errors as an outfielder, a corner outfielder especially, is like ungodly. Like, that might not happen at the University of Arkansas for the rest of our lives. I mean, that's insane. Arkansas's outfield last year didn't commit 7 in totality, like the entire group, which was a revolving door of guys. Ross Lovich was a really bad defender. He committed 1. It's really hard to make errors in the outfield. Most of them, I'm assuming, I mean, he had some throwing errors in there, but Heston, as y'all remember, he liked to just drop a routine fly ball. And so you see those drop-offs there in 2018, 2019. And I'm not saying, hey, it's just because of Heston Kjerstad and Casey Martin, but you had 2 guys who were more hitters than fielders, and they made a ton of mistakes. And so it's really, you know, that kind of dragged down the overall look of the team. I'm going to pull these numbers up again because you just see, like, after that, Arkansas really got a more well-rounded roster, especially on the defensive end. And you could argue the last few years they've kind of gone after some guys like a John Bolton who are more of, and a Ty Wilmsmeyer, who are more defenders than they are hitters. And so when we're talking about this year's team, and we're talking about how good they are defensively, one thing that I guess you could consider a red flag is that a lot of the guys on this roster that are expected to start in the lineup would probably classify as more hitters than they are fielders. I mean, Brent Iredale, pretty good fielder. I would say an above average fielder, but he's more of he's a hitting prospect, not as much of a fielding prospect. Vahiva Aloy even fits that criteria, more of a hitting prospect than he is a shortstop defensive prospect. Nolan Souza, second base, of course, fits that criteria. In the outfield, even, I mean, Kendall Diggs, more of a hitter. Logan Maxwell, more of a hitter. Charles Davalon, who might even be my pick. If we're going back to Aaron's question in terms of who's the best overall defender on the team, I think Davalon's a sneaky candidate to maybe be that in center field. Even he didn't play center field last year, more of a hitter, more of a well-rounded prospect. And of course, Ryder Helfrich behind the plate, definitely more of a hitter, though he's another one that I think when we're talking about how good this Arkansas defense is going to be this year, I think Davalon in center and Ryder Helfrich and behind the plate at catcher are really going to be ones you have to circle. Helfrich is kind of the big X factor, and we'll go ahead and talk about him just to start it all off as we make our way around the diamond. So Helfrich did not have the freshman year that many expected and that we had kind of hoped he might have. And, he's a humongous prospect coming in, was a guy that had all the tools. I mean, we see the power, you see you see the size and the strength, you see kind of the vision of what he could be. But it just really didn't show up, whether it was at the plate or behind it, as a freshman. And, we went into the year last year, and some of you may not remember this, but in the people that were like talking about the team, it was viewed as like Ryder Helfrich was the better catcher defensively, and that Hudson White was maybe the more consistent like hitter. It was like, okay, he might be one of the better hitters on the team. But in the regular season, it was Hudson White who ended up being pretty solid behind the plate by the end of the year, and Ryder who really struggled in his opportunities behind the plate. I know it's kind of tough to do the whole just chalk it up to him being a freshman thing, but at catcher, I really do think that's something you can do. I mean, hell, even Casey Opitz didn't play right away as a catcher at Arkansas as a true freshman. And so like there's a lot of examples of this. James McCann really struggled offensively and defensively as a freshman catcher at Arkansas. And so if Ryder Helfrich were to go on to be a really good prospect and play in the big leagues and all that, it would not be without precedent. And some of these guys I've mentioned earlier, like a Parker Rowland, like a Michael Turner, they entered their careers at Arkansas with way more question marks than Ryder Helfrich. And so I'm giving this coaching staff and I'm giving Ryder a lot of benefit of the doubt. And make no mistake, like that's how I'm approaching it. You don't have to approach it that way. Hell, you could just, I've been getting accused of being a little bit of a sunshine pumper here lately, which makes sense. I mean, I've been saying a lot of positive things about the team, but that's kind of how I view it, where I'm trusting the development of Ryder Helfrich. I'm trusting Bobby Wernis to do what he's done with the last 4 or 5 Arkansas catchers. I'm also trusting DVH with some of the things that he's seen and some of the things that he's saying about Ryder Helfrich. Like he said the other day in his press conference that Ryder last year, they felt like was the best receiver on the team in terms, and for, those that aren't familiar, I'm talking about ability to, catch the pitch that's thrown at you, but also frame it. How do you keep how do you keep your glove, making it look like it's in the zone? If you have a breaking ball that's kind of on the outer half, do you move your entire body? Like, these are the kinds of things you talk about when you're talking about a receiver. And they felt like Ryder Helfrich last year was the best receiver on the staff, but maybe just wasn't ready to be an everyday catcher as a true freshman, which most aren't. And so I think he's going to be a guy that we look up halfway through the year and we're like, damn, this dude's a pretty solid defender. The throwing and catching ability is definitely in play. I mean, all the scouts love his arm behind the plate. The pop time is one of those that's been pretty consistent. And he did pretty solid during the fall at controlling the run game when he was challenged. And so look, is he going to be all SEC defense as a sophomore? Probably not. But I think he's going to be a lot more solid than maybe his career at Arkansas points to at this stage. And so admittedly, like I said, I'm giving a lot of benefit of the doubt to this coaching staff a little bit. But that's just kind of the way I view it. Moving on around the dime, I'm gonna go to third base real quick. Brent Iredale is an interesting one because one of the first things we heard about him when he first got to campus was he was more athletic than I think they realized. Like, he was just a better overall. They knew they were getting a good hitter, but I think they thought they were, they thought they were getting a big time hitter, and they knew that. And one, they didn't think they were going to get him, but I think they were impressed by just his overall athleticism, which is why I compared him body type wise and just athleticism and kind of what I think he's going to do at the plate. I compared him to Caden Wallace. Caden Wallace is a freak athlete, and I would give Caden Wallace the advantage if I were comparing their defensive abilities. Brent Iredale also was charged with an error in that Oklahoma State exhibition, which really wasn't his fault. It was a ball that Reese Robinette probably should have scooped over there at first base. And I want to say there was maybe one or two other errors that I can remember in fall ball. I don't think Brent Iredale is maybe that level of athlete, like not quite a Caden Wallace level of athlete. I don't think he's going to be able to make some of the plays that Caden Wallace made, like in the postseason and down the stretch that year. He was so clutch defensively. But I also think Caden Wallace is just a special talent. Like I mentioned, he had 11 errors. So you could actually argue, if you were doing it by the numbers, that Caden Wallace was one of the worst defenders Arkansas had. But obviously, we all know that's not true. I don't think Brent Iredale is quite that. Again, I don't think it's quite that level. But I do think he's going to be very solid. And I think when you just look at some of the guys that have played third base over there the last few years, there's been some pretty damn good defenders. Jared Sprague last year was really solid. Caleb Cali the year before outperformed expectations as a defender. That was a huge question mark for him coming in. He made a ton of progress and ended up being pretty solid. I mean, his fielding percentage was .950 that year in 2023. I think Brent Iredale is a better overall athlete and better overall defender than Caleb Cali, but not quite as good as Caden Wallace. So if you can kind of remember what both of those guys were like, I think he fits right in, is what I'm saying. Like, I don't think there's going to be a massive drop off in third base defense for Arkansas. I also am not predicting for you that he's going to be a lights out, blow you away defender. I think he's, for the most part, going to make the plays he needs to make. Will occasionally make a really athletic play because he's a really athletic guy, and that's just what guys like him do. But overall, I would say you're looking at like slightly above average defense from the third base spot. We touched on Vahiva Aloy a little bit and how defensively last year his progress was one of the bright spots of the team last year, I thought. Because, dude, when he first committed, we all collectively looked up his numbers and we were like, holy cow. I think it was like 16 errors or something like that as a freshman. Seems like they got that worked out pretty well. He was very consistent. And again, I don't know if he's necessarily the best athlete Arkansas's had at shortstop here lately. He's definitely not a Jalen Battles in terms of just overall being a dude like that. I don't think he's on that level by any means. But I think Vahiva Aloy at this point is kind of proven to be a pretty solid and dependable defender if he can get to the ball. And for the most part, like, I don't think it was a huge issue, like his range. I don't think it was something that really set Arkansas back last year. I felt like for the most part, he made the plays he was supposed to make. And DVH, they feel like he's a little bit better. They feel like he's a little bit more consistent. And so I think doing what he did last year, if I pull up the numbers real quick, last year defensively, Vahiva Aloy, he made 6 errors and had a .963 fielding percentage. Again, numbers aren't everything. Numbers aren't the whole story. But if he does anything close to that, I feel like you can definitely live with that. That's above average defense for an SEC shortstop. Now, Nolan Souza going on to second base now. Nolan Souza is a fascinating one because athletically, he is definitely in that like Caden Wallace range of like just special, get to the ball, move left to right, speed, all of that. Like Nolan Souza, from a range standpoint, you could argue is one of the more intriguing athletes Arkansas has in the field. But he's coming off a year as a freshman where he was primarily a DH. He made some starts in the field. Let me look. Overall, it looks like Nolan Souza actually had a flawless fielding percentage last year. He had 25 fielding opportunities and did not make an error. So, I mean, do with that what you will. I mean, make of that what you want. And I believe he played some first base as well. Nolan Souza's an intriguing one. Actually, I get now to think about it. Nolan Souza spent most of his time at third base last year when he was playing the field, mostly midweeks and stuff like that. So you kind of saw little glimmers there, but not a huge sample size to go off of. And like I said, I got to watch him like every day this fall. I believe it was 14, 15 scrimmages, and I saw him play second base. Maybe saw him field 10 balls total. Like now, obviously, you can get there before, you can get there early, watch in and out, and you can really get a better feel probably. I didn't see anything in the fall that would make me think he was going to be a bad defender by any means. He did fairly well in his limited opportunities last year. So I think he's kind of a question mark, and I don't mean that in a bad way. We just don't know. We just have not seen this guy play defense for a full season. So maybe he'll wear down. Maybe he won't be as consistent, but I feel like second base, most people that have played baseball would agree with this. Second base is an easy position to kind of adjust to because you're as far away from home plate as any of the other positions most of the time. You also have the shortest throw. And so, if you're asking me, like me personally, I played second base growing up and I loved it. I love playing second base way more than I love playing third base, not comparing myself to Nolan Souza. But I think for a sophomore who's kind of an evolving development project, and we think he's going to be a really awesome hitter, and I'm pretty confident in predicting for you, he's going to be awesome at the plate. So you're getting above average offense from your second baseman. Will it be average defense? Will it be above average? We really don't know. And I don't feel confident making a proclamation. I want to wait a little bit. But I'm very intrigued by the athlete Nolan Souza. And I think there's a case to be made. He's going to be a plus defender. I'll be honest with you, because going into the offseason, there was a lot of talk about Nolan Souza playing first base, particularly if Cam Kojal was going to be a guy that cracked the lineup. A lot of people thought that needed to be at second base. And so there was a thought, maybe you just slide Nolan Souza over there. It went the opposite direction in the fall. Nolan Souza was playing some shortstop. He might be the backup shortstop. Like actually, that's a lie. Gabe Frazier is definitely the backup shortstop if healthy. We'll see what his health is. But Nolan Souza looks solid as shortstop to me. Like, then again, I think it kind of speaks to how they view him as a defender. And so again, there's a little bit of projection based in this assessment that I'm giving. But when you look at the coaching staff and what they've done with some of these guys over the years, it's hard not to trust them a little bit. And of course, Nolan Souza is replacing Peyton Stovall. People don't remember this. I'm about to drop a little bit of a knowledge on some shit that y'all forgot about, or people forgot about. Peyton Stovall, when he got to Arkansas, you want to talk about guys who were viewed as more of hitters than fielders. Peyton Stovall's defense was a fat question mark, like very fat question mark. They started him off at shortstop when he first got healthy in the fall, and it was a complete disaster. Very clear. I mean, this is also freshman year Peyton Stovall, by the way, pre-freshman year even. So there's no shame in that, but it really did not go well. They moved him to third base for a little bit, and it was a little bit better. But even then, I don't think the coaching staff would have felt comfortable. Part of why they moved Caden Wallace from right field to third base was because they realized Peyton Stovall really probably couldn't handle that spot as a true freshman, of course. By the end of his career, I'm sure they would have felt a little bit more comfortable. But again, his defense was very much a question. They ended up playing him at first base, where he kind of found a groove and was I'd say an overqualified first baseman by the end of it. But again, I'm giving this coaching staff a lot of credit at how they've developed some of these guys and their skill sets. By the time he left Arkansas, he was one of the best fielders Arkansas had at second base. Of course, Robert Morris is going to always probably hold that honor as the best defender Arkansas had at second base. But Peyton Stovall was very, very solid, very good, turning double plays, making throws, covering ground. He checked all the boxes. And that just was not the case when he was a true freshman. And so for me, when I'm thinking about a guy like Nolan Souza, who's coming into Arkansas a little bit more of a high level athlete, and has already kind of shown a little bit, got a really good arm. forgive me if I'm just going to kind of assume that Nolan Souza is going to be pretty solid at second base. Are y'all with me on that or no? Maybe we need to see more, of course. And we'll continue to monitor these situations. I can change my mind. Maybe I'll go to the scrimmage on Friday and Souza will make 4 errors and I'll walk it back. But that's just kind of how I view it at this point in time. First base is a fascinating one, by the way. Now, as we move across the diamond, Michael Anderson is probably the best defensive option Arkansas has at first base. That's the Rhode Island transfer that has, 23 home runs, has played a lot of first base in his college career. Probably the safest option Arkansas has as a defender at first base. Doesn't seem like he's going to crack the everyday lineup, which then kind of leads the way for someone like Kahio Aloy, who is coming off a year where he DH'd. He's still kind of learning the position. Perhaps it'll be Rocco Pepe, a guy who's coming over from the outfield, has been banged up. He's going to be kind of learning the position as well. Will it be Reese Robinette, another guy who is kind of recently making that switch over from third base to first base? And Reese Robinette, by the way, is another one that much better defender than I think people realize. Most of that has been at third base. Weirdly enough, he looks more comfortable at third than he does at first. Because a lot of times if you're thinking, okay, we've got four fielders, where do we put the worst one? First base would probably be on that list. But if you ask me, Robinette's better at third than he is at first. But of course, he's not going to start over Brent Iredale. So we'll see if any of those guys, of those three that I just mentioned, Pepe, Aloy, and Robinette, we'll see if any of those guys really start to get a firm grasp on the position. We'll see who's been doing their work in the indoor, getting some drills in, getting the fungo out and getting some ground balls hit to them. We'll see who's been really adapting, and maybe one of those guys takes a real step forward. We've seen it happen a lot of times. I mean, Trevor Rizal in 2019 was a converted second baseman who went over to play first base. Heston Kjerstad, they moved over to first base during the 2020 season. I mentioned Peyton Stovall, of course. There's been Brady Slavens is another guy who did not come to Arkansas as a first baseman. They converted him over. And so we've seen Arkansas successfully kind of solve the first base issue by getting someone who's not a first baseman. And it seems like they're going that route. So in terms of if I'm projecting defense, your guess is as good as mine as of today. We just need to see more out of these guys, and hopefully we'll have some reports there in terms of what they look like at these scrimmages and all that. But moving on to the outfield, I mentioned Davalon, who is just a really well-rounded athlete, really solid. I mean, he looks the part. He looks like a center fielder. You got the pants rolled up above his knee. Leadoff guy, center field. He kind of is in that Tavian Josenberger kind of mold. And he's another guy who bounced around positions. Like, I think when he got to college, there was some discrepancy about, like, is he going to be a second baseman? Is he going to be a center fielder, left fielder, right fielder? But I just think he's a good athlete, a guy that has played outfield, can cover ground, looked really solid in the fall. Not a massive sample size, but I saw nothing in the fall that would dissuade me from thinking that guy is the everyday center fielder, and it's something we don't have to worry about. Obviously, Arkansas has had some really, really, really good center fielders here in the last decade or so. When you think about Benintendi, Dominic Fletcher, Braden Webb, Christian Franklin. Ty Wilmsmeyer was a good defender last year. Tavian Josenberger, a really good defender out there in center. And so there's some big shoes to fill. And I'm not saying Charles Davalon's going to be better than any of those guys necessarily, but I feel pretty comfortable with him there. I feel like he kind of fits right in. Good athlete. I don't have too much of a concern there. On the corners in the outfield, if there is a weak spot for this Arkansas team, defensively, I should say, that might be it. Kendall Diggs, we assume, is projected to start in the outfield, kind of get his spot back that he had. Maybe that changes. Maybe he ends up being a DH guy. Maybe he ends up not being in the lineup at all. But just if we were starting the season today, I would assume to see Kendall Diggs there in right field. He's gotten a lot better as an outfielder. When he first started in 2023, I was very, very concerned about it. Very skeptical that he was ever even going to be playable out there. But he clearly ended up turning that around and doing okay. So maybe there's some progress that he's made there. He was a lot better last year as a defender. And when he was out in the Cape a couple summers ago, he's making some nice plays. So I think there's reason to believe he'll be pretty solid. And he's a good athlete. He's another guy that came to Arkansas as a third baseman who kind of bounced around before kind of finding his home. And DVH always says the scouts feel like Kendall's long-term future is in the outfield. So we'll see if he's able to live up to that. I feel okay about him as a defender, not great. And that's that's about all I can say on that front as well. So, I mean, I'm sure you guys all have your opinion. You've seen Kendall play outfield a little bit. Again, I'm not saying he's bad, but if there were a question mark on the team, that might be one. And I think left field with Logan Maxwell, who, again, I saw a little bit in the fall, seemed fine to me. Seems like the kind of guy that will just catch what's hit at him. Not necessarily like a superb next level athlete. Not a super big guy. Don't think the arm is like super strong by any means. Kendall, by the way, I think does have a pretty, I would say, a average to above average throwing arm from right field. So I think like I don't have too much concern there. Davalon, I like his throwing arm. I think it's a pretty solid one. I wouldn't say nobody has a Dominic Fletcher type of arm in this outfield. Nobody has a Caden Wallace type of arm in this outfield. But I would say center field and right field, you're looking at solid arm strength. Left field with Logan Maxwell, I think you've got a little bit of a question mark with the arm strength. And in terms of just like, is he a plus defender? He was a guy that DH'd most of his time at TCU. So it's very fair to question whether or not you're going to be getting plus defensive outfield there. And so look, if there's, again, if you're making the case for, is this team going to be better defensively, you really need to figure out that outfield and figure out, is this something we can really work with? Or do we need to bring in a guy like Brenton Clark? Do we need to bring in a guy like Justin Thomas, a little bit more of a high level athlete? We'll see. But really, ultimately, I just kind of went through the 9 spots. That's kind of how I view it. I think this team's going to be above average defensively. Like, I think they would probably be closer to what they've been the last 4 years than they would be that 2018, 2019 range, just because I don't think they're going to have a guy that commits 16 errors. Like, I just don't see that guy in the infield necessarily. In the outfield, like I said, you might have some range questions and you might have some arm strength questions, but I don't think those guys are going to be racking up errors necessarily. And again, this is kind of part of why I say fielding percentage is not the end all be all when it comes to defense. There's a lot more that tells the story. And so if there's a concern for this Arkansas team, it definitely would be in that outfield and their ability to cover ground and really hold guys and keep guys honest on the base pass, not advancing freely. But I don't know. We'll have more on this front as we get closer to the season. I was kind of waiting maybe to do this, but the questions ramp up, and here we are. So let me know what you guys think. Where are your question marks defensively? Who are you kind of most intrigued by? But I took a long-winded way to answer the question. But Aaron, I think Charles Davalon sneaky might be, if I had to pick one guy as like the best defender on the team, it might be him. And I think he's going to need to be if this Arkansas outfield, like I just mentioned some of the range questions. I think for this Arkansas defense to work, you really need to be strong up the middle. And that means Helfrich needs to be really solid behind the plate, really needs to be able to control the run game. Your middle infield defensively, the two Hawaiians, you feel pretty good about Aloy. Souza's going to need to like really show he's a capable, solid, dependable defender there at second base. And Arkansas has a good track record of developing just that. And then I think Davalon is going to have to potentially cover some woes there in the outfield. But ultimately, I kind of like the feel of it. Like, I think I don't really, I'm not going to lose sleep over Arkansas's defensive alignment leading up to the season. And like I said to start, like, I think Arkansas's got guys that are kind of more hitters than they are fielders, which is okay. I feel like if you just look at the numbers, you look at how good Arkansas was in the field and how much they struggled at the plate, I think that's something last year, if you would have told me, we all would have signed up for it. And so, again, let me know what you guys think, and let me know what you want to hear me talk about next. I've got topics for days, but I always like hearing from you guys, hearing your perspective. And, I always like whenever there's a question that really gets me thinking. We've had several of those. So I appreciate everybody who's chimed in and tapped in. Make sure you like the show. Make sure you are subscribed to Inside Arkansas's YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribed to all of our podcast feeds, the Baumbastic Podcast, the Pod at the Palace, Inside Arkansas Live, Pod of That Nature. We're doing it all. We're crushing it over here right now. So let's make it through these last few dog days and let's get on to baseball season. Hope everybody has a beautiful Monday, and I will see you guys tomorrow.